We have a new development in the James Harden trade saga, and this whole situation is just getting uglier and uglier by the day. James Harden has come out and said that he will not play for an organization that involves Daryl Morey, essentially saying that he is refusing to play for the Philadelphia 76ers this season. And he can say that if he wants, but for reasons that we're going to get into in this video, if he really wants to act on that, he's going to have to risk the entirety of the rest of his NBA career. Now let's back up a little bit and figure out how we got here. Of course, James Harden wants to trade this offseason. He ended up opting into his contract to get the most amount of money after a free agent deal with the Houston Rockets fell through, and now he wants to be traded specifically to the Clippers. A couple of days ago, we got reports and rumors that the Sixers are not going to trade him. They did not like any of the trade offers out there, so they're going to move on. And now Harden is saying he will not show up. He will not play for the Sixers so long as Daryl Morey is involved. Now, we're making assumptions here, but reports are that the reason that Harden is so upset with the Sixers, with Morey specifically, and the reason he doesn't want to be a part of the organization anymore is because last offseason, he took a pay cut, by all reports, so that he could help the team bring in more pieces that season to try and win a championship, with the idea being that he was going to get a long-term contract extension this offseason. He said in his statement, or in his words, he said that Daryl Morey is a liar. He doesn't want to be on a team that has Daryl Morey running things because he is a liar. Presumably, that lie was take the pay cut last year and we'll make sure to get you your big contract this year. It's going to help us win this last season. Unfortunately for Harden and the Sixers, that wasn't the case. And in Harden's words and in Harden's mind, Morey backed out of a wink-wink agreement that they had. Now, to be clear, if that is what happened, that is illegal by the CBA. You are not allowed to do that. You are not allowed to have some kind of wink-wink, under-the-table agreement with a player on a pay cut for 1 year and that turning into a big long-term contract the following year. It's not allowed. It's something that teams have gotten punished for in terms of losing multiple draft picks in the past. It's not a thing. I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I'm not saying that that isn't Harden's understanding of the situation. I'm just saying that there's no way that Harden can go out and prove that and try and get his money anyway, because it's not something you're supposed to do. It's not something he's ever going to be able to prove that the Sixers and that Morey did. So now we are pivoting to this idea that James Harden, in his own words, is just not going to show up. He's not going to play for the Sixers. And once again, just like Ben Simmons a few years ago, the Sixers are going to go into their season with Joel Embiid at MVP level, and the second best player on the team is just going to refuse to play. But there's a very big distinction between the Simmons situation and the Harden situation now. If you go and look in the CBA, the old CBA, the new CBA, this clause exists either way. It says that if a player is on an expiring contract and they refuse to play for the team, they don't show up at all, that team has the right to void their contract. They are not on the team anymore. And more importantly for Harden, that player, whoever refused to play, in this case James Harden, is not allowed to sign with another basketball team, NBA team, overseas, G League, whatever. Not allowed to sign and play professional basketball anywhere else until the team that they withheld services from, in this case the Sixers, says that they're allowed to. So what that means is if James Harden does not play, refuses to show up, he will be ineligible to play professional basketball anywhere in the world until the Sixers decide that they're okay letting him go somewhere else, and he will not be a part of the Sixers organization this year, and he will not be a part of any other professional basketball organization until the Sixers decide that it's okay. Now, that might seem like an absolutely insane outcome, and I really didn't think that it was something that we were going to get to, but it's a real possibility, and it's a real point of leverage that the Sixers have now in this situation. Because if Harden's true to his word and says he's not going to play for a team that has Daryl Morey, involved in the organization, then this clause is going to come into play, and the Sixers could realistically say, okay, you don't want to play for us, that's fine. You're not going to play anywhere else. And the whole goal of Harden's actions over the last few seasons have been to get this big contract, one more big deal. He refused it from Houston. He refused it from Brooklyn. He now went to Philly, thought he was getting it there and hasn't. And if his contract gets voided because he doesn't show up and then isn't allowed to play for other teams, then he's never getting that big deal either. This has now become more of a possibility than ever. It's not ideal for Philadelphia because it doesn't solve their issue. They still need either James Harden or a James Harden replacement on their roster this upcoming season. But if he really doesn't want to play, then it's something that is going to come into play. Now, the only reason this is a thing, and it wasn't the case for someone like Ben Simmons or even someone like Kevin Durant last year refusing to play for at least a little bit for Brooklyn before deciding to return before the season, the reason it wasn't a thing for those guys is because they weren't on an expiring contract. And Harden's status as a player on an expiring contract changes this situation completely and puts this clause in play, basically saying he has to show up. Like, there's really no situation which Harden can look at this and say that his best option is just to not show up to the Sixers and risk them enacting this clause of the CBA. Now, importantly, it doesn't say in what capacity James Harden needs to show up. It doesn't say how well he needs to play. It doesn't say what kind of shape he needs to be in. It doesn't say how much he needs to practice, how many minutes he needs to play, how impactful he needs to be. It just says that he needs to be there. He can't withhold his services from the Philadelphia 76ers. It's not a thing, right? So he can still do essentially what he's saying, and I'm never going to play for the Sixers. He can show up in terrible shape and still, not risk getting his contract voided and never being able to sign with another team and that part of the CBA. That doesn't have to come into play if he just shows up. But the way he's talking right now, he's just not going to show up. And the problem with all of this for Harden is, even if he shows up to the team but not in great shape and doesn't play particularly well, and he still gets to keep his contract for the season, the CBA clause doesn't come into effect, he goes into free agency next year, he is able to get away from the Sixers. The problem is that situation, that option doesn't get to the end goal for James Harden, which has always been this big, massive contract that he's been looking for years. And if he plays terribly and isn't in great shape, no team is going to give James Harden a big contract, just like no team is willing to give up a lot in a trade right now because they know that he's a free agent in the following offseason. This is a no-win situation for Harden and honestly for the Sixers as well. And both sides are just digging their heels in on this, and they are refusing to bend at all to what the other person, or in this case, the other team, wants. And so to me, I see three ways in which this plays out. Option one, James Harden doesn't show up. He refuses to be any part of this Philadelphia 76ers organization. He really pushes the envelope and forces them to either just live with him not being on the team or enact this CBA clause and hold that over him until they feel like letting him go and sign with another team. That's option one. Option two is he shows up, but he's in terrible shape. He doesn't play well at all. He barely even plays for the team, but he keeps his money for this year. But that big free agency contract this offseason, any kind of big opportunity like that, not an option for him. And then option number three is that he shows up, plays really well, gets to free agency in the following offseason, and gets a big contract with another team. But there's no option here where James Harden doesn't play for the Sixers and this works out well for him. There's no option where he shows up, doesn't play for the Sixers, and it works out for the Sixers. The only thing that benefits both sides is James Harden showing up, no matter what deal he thought he was getting, no matter what he thought Daryl Morey did or didn't do correctly or lied to him, whatever the case may be, no matter what he thinks happened. The best way that he can try and solve this is to show up and play well and try and get a big contract next offseason, and that's going to help Philly as well, and I think that's what they're banking on and what they're counting on. But the problem with all of this is it's James Harden, and if there's ever been a player in the history of the league that will sabotage a team's season for their own benefit to try and get their way, to try and get what they want, that player is James Harden. We've seen it on two different teams, and this guy will 100% sabotage your season if he feels motivated to do so, if he feels like it's going to eventually get him what he wants. And in this case, it might not get him what he wants. He might not get this big contract that he wants ultimately this offseason, but if he's really this bitter and really is that hurt by the actions of the Philadelphia 76ers and Daryl Morey, he might just do it anyway. And this is truly an unprecedented situation. We thought the Ben Simmons thing was weird, but at least he had the option to just not show up. Harden doesn't have that option. And so unless Philly really gets aggressive in trade talks and ultimately does decide to move Harden to the Clippers or elsewhere, this is only going to get more and more weird. And I can't wait to see how this eventually plays out.